without further ado, Julian.
Salam alaikum. Shalom. ما شالوم شيء خبر شيء حوادث لا could ask me شالوم لا أبدا. The exchange of the news was a formality which always took place when you went to the Farij of the Duru. That done? Okay. The events depicted were 2/3 of my lifetime ago. And I did, as Richard has said, I had a camera with me. I just took photographs. I'm not a photographer. Then I decided quite recently, beginning of COVID, that I ought to produce a book for Omanis to see how it was in those days before the age of oil. And so I I found I got 1,000 slides, mainly in Ektachrome. And I had them scanned. I then found a book designer called Musa El-Kilbani, whose family came from Ibri, and he did the basic design of the book. What you're looking at up here, just to interrupt, is the launch of the book in Muscat on the last day of November, so for which I flew out with Cosmo, my son, there, and that's the video that they made.
ومع احتفال بلادنا العزيزة بعيدها الوطني 54 المجيد، نجتمع اليوم لنشهد تدشين كتاب أيام خلت في عمان.
I think we better start with my book now. Right. The man in the centre is called Humaid bin Rashid. He was a man with incredible vision, but he was the landlord of the premises which the company had built its premises on, and also he had property in Ibri. He had a son called Muhammad who had a shop in the souk, and Muhammad was the father of Hilal bin Muhammad and also Abdullah bin Muhammad. When I was in Abu Dhabi, I made a trip back to Ibri. I just drove there in those days, and I was walking around the place where the premises had been, and I came across somebody came out to say, "Here's an Englishman. What's he doing here?" And it was, I think, Muhammad, and he took me in, and I then met up with Abdullah and Hilal. Abdullah I had been constantly in touch with for a long time, and he's a very. They both of them work in the Ministry of the Diwan. I'm not quite sure what that is. Abdullah's on the intelligence side, and Hilal I met more recently because he was in charge of the Sultan's Farms and Gardens, which were huge. I don't know, you probably all know about them, but they are all over. It's got a huge experimental farm out to the beyond the airport, and which we visited. And but he then has been promoted recently to be head of the Royal Cavalry and the Camel Corps. So he's also quite a chap. But these two knew of the project from my book, and they said this surely should be an Omani heritage project. And so they took it on board to take in charge the production of the book, and they put up a proposal that it should be taken in charge by the ministry. There was no reply, as usual. So, in fact, Hilal financed the publication of the book with the family bookshop, and they took the material and they did all the production of it. I think the result, I'm absolutely amazed at its quality. They have sold in the family bookshop, apparently, 270 copies. at an enormous price of many rials, and which is absolutely fantastic. And Hilal is talking about going to a second edition. So that's amazing. Back to stuff. The early history. Before the Second World War and immediately after it, the Iraq Petroleum Group embarked on exploration programs in all the countries on the periphery of Arabia, outside of the red line, which delimited the Central Arabian patch, which became, of course, the kingdom of the Saudi kingdom, and also huge amounts of oil. But that was in the American reserve that the Iraq Petroleum Company could explore and enter into production, of course, in Qatar and Abu Dhabi and elsewhere. I'm lost. And then in the case of Oman, the exploration company took a concession from the previous Sultan, who would be Timur, I can't remember his other name, and which was renewed by Sultan Said bin Timur after the Second World War to a concession for Dhofar and Oman. In the end, because the Sultan was strong, felt himself very secure in the south of Oman, not nearly so secure in the north. And after, as you'll see, in 1948, Jabal Fahud was spotted from the air as the absolute classic anticline, which is a mound here which has come up from beneath the surface, and it provides traps for oil. And anticlines are what people go for. And this was a classic one. And in 1949, it was determined to be a prime objective for the Iraq Petroleum, the PDO as it was then. In fact, what is on the left, what is the date of the 54, the Imam died, and he was succeeded by his brother, Ghalib. And of course, there was dissension between the imamate, the Ibadi imamate in the interior, and the Sultan, who was Sultan of Muscat, but in fact lived entirely in the south. And so one of the bones of contention of the imamate, because they made a rebellion against the Sultan, and one of the terms was the fact that they were lords of the interior at that point. Oman was an intensely tribal society, and we had a very good lecture last week from Dawn Chatty on the tribes of the south, who were the Jenaba, the Wahiba, who were in the Sharqiya, and the Harasis and the Jiddatul Harasis. But Fahud was in Duru territory. The Duru were a tribe that had an enormous domain, and in fact, it was the tribe with whom we dealt. The company, by agreement with the Sultan, would employ the workforce from the tribal area in which they were operating. So then what the company needed was a system of discussion with the tribes. So they had these liaison representatives, and there was a liaison representative in Muscat itself who dealt with things down there, and in the operations centre, which in my day was at Fahud, and also very early on in Ibri, there was a liaison representative, and these were established very early on in the time of the IBC PDO. The Duru had always been, there was no reason they should have allegiance to either the Sultan or the Imam. They were a Bedou tribe, very independent, a numerous tribe, and nobody quite knew what their allegiance was. Eventually, the Minister of the Interior, Said Ahmed bin Ibrahim, a marvellous man with a cleft palate, but he was very competent, and he secured the Duru allegiance to the Sultan. And the Sultan made a famous trip in 1955, which was well written up by James Morris, as he was then, before he became Jan, and he toured the interior. He'd never been there before, was to show his face and gain the allegiance of people in the interior. Back to Fahud. The spudding of Fahud took place in December 1955, and without doing actually very much seismic work, I rather suspect. And so although they drilled 12,000 feet, it was a dry hole, and in January '56, it was abandoned as a dry hole. This was the biggest disaster. It was a classic disaster in the oil industry, and was famous because little work had been done. The IPC PDO went on to drill 3 more wells in Harbour, Afar and Haima, all proved dry, and then the IPC shareholders made a decision that they would withdraw from Oman. There were no prospects. The BP, the French and the American couple were fairly long on, i.e. they were well supplied with Middle East oil, but Shell was not. It was short of Middle East oil. So the decision was made by Shell to, who were accompanied by Partex, who always went with Shell, who was the Gulbenkian interest, to buy out the other partners. This meant in 58, 59, or 1960 was the buyout, and this meant that Shell had to restaff the company, and this was where I was summoned in my posting in Sudan, which was not enjoyed very much. Would I go to Oman? Where the hell's Oman? And but I did discover, and it was the best move that I ever made. And thank goodness, thanks Shell for all that. I joined Shell overseas staff. In those days, that's what you did. In 58, 59, I volunteered to learn Arabic and was sent to Lebanon, where I did the MICAS Arabic School short course in 58, 59, was posted to the Sudan and then transferred to Ibri in 1961. So that's the background. The Sultan was quite keen on the development, so geologists landed at Dukum Beach by watercraft, what do they call landing craft, on several occasions. So a lot of work was done in the south under the aegis of the Sultan. And then, of course, they had to head across the village. Next slide. This was the cellar, which was the basic point through which you drilled the well. That was the cellar of Fahud number 1, which I visited when I went to Fahud. You can see the massive mountain behind me, in the photograph, and that's the well, the cellar of the well. Next, right, broad brush map. The PDO, IPC PDO, the first PDO, had did a lot of work up in the north, and the region behind Ibri, to the outside of Ibri, those brown lines ignore, was Duru territory. But they also did a lot of work in the mountains and the plains between Ibri and Bahraini, and worked a lot with the Bahraini people. But when the Saudis captured Bahraini, it was decided to focus entirely on the southern area, and to anyway that they couldn't continue in the Bahraini region. So you can see the position of Fahud due south of Ibri, and on the left you've got a schematic map of Ibri where our base was. Tanam was the headquarters of the Duru, where they grew their date palms, and then the blue line indicates the Wadi Aswad, and the Jebel Aswad, and the valleys at the top of the valley was where they lived. And for me, it was a good hour and a half's drive to drive out from Ibri on the track. There were no roads, and reach the Jebel Aswad, and you get inside the Jebel into the Wadi, the upstream bits of the Wadi, and you'd ask somebody, where's Sheikh Ali, the prominent Sheikh, and where had he moved to? Because they were constantly on the move. The goats ate all the grazing, and after a few days they'd have to move on, and that's how it was. You can also see in that schematic Jebel Fahud, and just north of it, just southwest of it, Yebal, which was the next well that was drilled, and then Nati was where the first strike of oil took place. Awafi was the water well, an abundant water well, which was a marvellous place. You'll see photographs of it. Right, next. What were we doing? Most of the time we were doing seismic work, and Peter here in the back was a member of SSL, which was the name of the seismic company. And we had 2 parties in the field, and it's a system of echo sounding, really. You set off an explosion on the surface, you have, what are they called, Peter? Geophones. Detectors? Geophones. Geophones, that's right. You laid out a line of geophones on the ground, and they were, when you set off the explosion, there was an echo from all the different formations below the surface, and you could draw a sort of map of what was beneath the surface in that straight line. We haven't invented 3-dimensional seismic work yet, but there's the recording machine up on the back of the truck. Next. Right, Ibri. You can see in the background the premises. On in the middle, with the greenery, is the company's premises, and it consisted of an office, the rep's house, which was had the only flush loo in the whole of the interior, and what else? We had a water well. The water well was deeply sunk, and Humaid had determined where it would be, and it provided water, the most delicious water I ever knew. Humaid, no, don't go. To the left of the company premises was Humaid's house, and where he had his being. He also had extensive properties amongst the date palms in there. On the right is the army camp. The Sultan was raising the field force, or the Sultan of Oman's, or SOAF, Sultan of Oman's armed forces, and the Northern Frontier Regiment was located there, and they were recruiting. The first soldiers were Baluch, and now they were recruiting proper Omani tribesmen from all over Oman into the army. That covers that. Next one. This is a picture of Ibri as it was in those days, a very, very fertile oasis. In the middle is the Husn, the castle, whatever, where the Wali of who was said Saud bin Harib al-Busaidi. So he was Muscat royal family, and a very pleasant elderly gentleman whom you will see later. And to the left of it was the souk. Now, the Faraj system. You all are familiar with the Faraj system. It's where you strike a source of water deep in the ground, up in the Jebel. You build an underground channel, and with access points all along it. And then where it emerges onto the surface starts the arterial system for the oasis. And you can see the abundance of water that's the one on the left is the first time that the water comes to the surface. And these are channels of the Faraj in Ibri. A very intricate method for timing, because this arterial system had to be diverted so that every property owner received their due share of water. This is a very complicated system, which I won't go into. On the bottom right is Humaid bin Rashid's, remember him, house inside the balad. I'm going to call it the balad because that's the oasis, and that's what they called it. Next. And here is Humaid bin Rashid. On the left, he is entertaining us to Gahwa in the morning, and you can see in the background, you can see to Rob Dalmeyer, who was as the company doctor for the interior, and he did the rounds. He was staying with us in Ibri. Next door to him on the right was an Indian who was also the resident in Ibri, sort of paramedic nurse, and whom the company provided. And this was the only medical facility in the whole of really Ibri, or the interior, because the government had not provided anything in that line. No education, no. Can you go back a slide? On the top right, you can see the school. Well, it wasn't really a school. They learned the Quran, they learned a bit of reading and writing, but it wasn't much in the way of education. So there were no schools, no hospitals, no medical service. The people just lived as they did. And the doctor, whose name was Lazarus, had probably delivered every single child in the whole of Ibri. And he was a very well-known man and very popular. Right, on. And here is Ibri Souk, just a general view of the souk. On the left, in the background, is what I call the camel park. Is where everybody who came in to the balad with his camel would just park his camel beside the fort. And on the right, you can see people, sellers of this and that. And so next, and the top right, you'll see Humaid bin Rashid, and that's the same picture as on the front of the book, with his son Muhammad, who is the father of Hilal and Abdullah, and my factotum Stayun on the left. And that was Muhammad's shop, and in the souk, where he sold a whole multitude of things. Bottom right, you can see pictures of the souk itself, and on the top left, you can see one of the activities of the. He's a khadim, being he was the barber of Ibri. Here is the camel souk, the wall of the fort. On the left-hand picture, you can see the wall of the fort. The rest is the camel park, and and on the right you can see the camel market taking place. Next. Oh, we're in the mosques. who's the Italian architect called Paolo something. He did a whole book on mosques in Oman, and I provided him these pictures of the Ibri mosques, which were quite notable. As the Mashra. Okay, these are notables in Ibri. Mohammed bin Saif al-Kilbani is on the left. Somebody's ringing a phone. In the middle is Mohammed bin Abdullah al-Yaqubi, who was a pretty disastrous person, as it turned out. Nobody trusted him. And on the right, you'll see Saud bin Harib al-Saidi, the Wali of Ibri, looking with his lovely white beard. And he was a very eminent man, a very wise man, actually. And his son Badr, on the left, he became Wali of Salala. And when I went to visit them in the 80s, there was a whole crowd of people in his anteroom because I was calling on him, but I put my card in the secretary's hands and immediately he invited me in to see him in front of all the other people waiting in his majlis. So anyway, he became Wali of Salala. Next, this is my PDO establishment. On the left, you'll see seated Sheikh Nasser. He was the secretary of the thing. We had about 15 people in the establishment. It included a wireless operator who was an Indian, and we had a single sideband radio system, and there was a call for all the people on the network at 9 o'clock every morning and at 4:30 in the afternoon. So this is how the party, the camp bosses, the party leaders of the seismic party would get in touch with me, and I dreaded the call where they would say, "Julian, they're all right on strike again, come down." And I had to get into my car and drive for 2 hours or whatever it was to get there. There was no traffic in Oman at all, apart from what we provided. So I had a second car, and I always went with 2 cars in case of breakdown. And Aziz was the driver of the second car. And back to the left-hand picture, the chap standing to the left of Sheikh Nasser is Tayoun, who was my factotum. We'll see him in a minute. In this, we also see Saif bin Salim al-Mandari, who was the village postman. Because we had a Gulf Air flight into Ibri airstrip every week, who brought me supplies and rations, and he'd also brought the mail from various places. And Saif Salim would pick up the mail and distribute it round the balad to the recipients. Next. Here, my factotum Tayoun on the left. He was a marvellous character, perfectly useless. But he was such a character that he got away with everything. But he did make arrangements for me, and occasionally. Now, the picture, and then Aziz, the driver of the second car, and on the left, on the right, you'll see me at the wheel of my car, and hanging off the side of the car, you will see my matara. And this is actually the one. And it was made of cloth, and you filled it with water, and as you went along, it evaporated on the outside, so the water was cool, and you could then drink from it. So here it is. Pass it round. I'd like it back. Okay. Next one, please. We entertained in the PDO house, and on the top left, you will see the Wali of Ibri being entertained. I'm next to him, and all his retainers. And on the right, you will see the meal in progress. We had a fantastic kitchen under the trees at the back of our patch, and the rice and the meat was cooked in huge pots. No, not yet. And bottom left is the dignitaries leaving after the lunch at the PDO house. And this was probably for the Eid, so there was some reason to have them all to lunch. Okay. What happened at the Eid al-Fitr in those days was the entire male members of the whole of Ibri would turn out into the wadi for dawn prayers at 6 in the morning. And here they are conducting prayers. It was an amazing event. Right. We employed Duru in the 2 seismic crews that we had because we were working in their area. And I had therefore the role of the liaison representative was to ensure the smooth running of all our operations. And when you're employing people, there are always problems, as anyone knows, in the personnel department. I think it used to be called personnel in my day. And so, who to deal with? there was a sheikhly clan in the Dhahirah. It was a very big tribe, and there was usually a tamima who was the top sheikh elected by the others, but Ali bin Hilal had usurped the position, and I never ever understood how. But he was in charge of everything, in charge of the workforce. He would sanction individuals for employment. On the top left picture is my favourite picture with Ali and his brother Humayd bin Hilal, who was always by his side. And the previous head sheikh had been the father of the man on the right, who is Sheikh Mutta. Now, Sheikh Mutta, I did not understand how Ali had seized it. Nobody did, but he had, and he kept his position throughout. And Sheikh Mutta became Tamima of the Dhahirah after, and until he died. Mutta died in 2021. I visited him in the Wadi Aswad on several occasions while he was the head, while he was Tamima. And he was a delightful old man. In fact, he came to London and for medical purposes, and he stayed in a flat provided by the Oman government off the Cromwell Road and went to the Cromwell Hospital. And I took him in the car and drove him around London to all the sites, Westminster and Houses of Parliament and all the rest, the Palace, etc. And he never said a word. And he was there for another 10 days, or another 9 days, and he never stirred outside his flat, I think. But anyway, that was a great thing. The Dhahirah lived under trees. It was called a farij. And Farig? Farig. I always called it farij, but Farig. I'm corrected. I'm very glad, because I'm not the only liaison representative in this room tonight. Julian Paxton was a little bit after me, but he was also a liaison rep and knows exactly the job that we had to do. Can we go back to the previous slide? The bottom left picture is me conducting discussions with Ali bin Hilal. Tasht Samara, I would say, because the trees were Samara trees, and under the Samara tree was Tasht Samara, and one would sit there and have one's discussions about why the people were on strike and the conditions. They were complaining about rations. They used to get a tin of bully beef and a packet of dry biscuits every day, and which they took home. They never ate them. I don't know what they ate on camp. But anyway, next, please. There are the farij with the bundles of personal goods hanging from the branches of the tree. There were no tents. There was no screen. That's how they lived. Next. These are certain individuals whom I on the left you will see Shane at Tanam, and he is doing what? He's smoking a ghalioun. He's smoking a pipe. And I got one of these pipes, and here it is. I expect you know it has a tiny little hole in the top. And to get it alight, you used a steel and a stone, a flint stone from the ground, and you struck it and lit a straw, and then you could light your pipe. I'll have it here if anyone wants to see it. Right. And otherwise, oh yes, in the right-hand picture, on the left of the three figures is Ruwais, who was Ali bin Hilal's slave. He was a freed man, but Ali always referred to him as Al-Khadim Ruwais, my slave. And he was a very important figure, because sometimes, if there had been a dissension of some kind on one of the camps, Ali would send Ruwais on his behalf to sort them out. And so he was quite influential, and we shall see him again. And the women, that was standard dress, although Safia in the middle was a very notable woman who lived at a Wayfi water well. I think I don't think there's anything wrong with her, but anyway, there she was, quite a character. And we Stayoun got to know her, and we used to, wherever we passed by, we would visit her. And my driver Aziz with his family on the right. Okay? The wells in the Wadi Aswad, here they are, and that is the source of water that they used. And Hamid bin Salah, one of them, people drinking, etc. Next. Ali got married again, and for his wedding, there was, of course, a terrific party, and there they are. And now Al-Khadim Ruwais is dancing. He was an extraordinarily good dancer, and he could leap into the air, and in that way. And next, I want to introduce from that picture the man in the middle of the three on the left, who is a particularly close friend of mine at the time. He was a very minor sheikh of the Duru, Saif bin Salim, and he always thought he was just a bit older than I was. He didn't have a clue what his, when he was born or anything. But there he is, and that picture on the right is Saif on the occasion of the launch of the book in November. He's still around, and yeah. All part of the wedding ceremony was a camel riding display, which was, they rode in pairs, 2 camels and 2 riders, and on the top left, and on the bottom picture, and there's all the contenders displaying themselves on the right. More wells in the Wadi Aswad. That's how they were. Tawi al-Kaf, Tawi Sarahiyya, and I can't remember the name of the one on the right. On top right, there you are, they're watering the camels. Fortunately, they could use old inner tubes as the containers to go down the well and bring the water up. So they'd ventured into the modern world by having rubber buckets, but otherwise it would have been a goat skin. There was a salt dome way down to the southeast, and it was a long way away, but a salt dome is where the salt is actually a fluid when it's in its natural state, and so it can, when there's enough of it, it can be moved by the earth itself to come up as a mountain. There are lots of them in Texas, where they're called islands, but here they were mined by the Duru as a source of salt, which they carried then to Ibri. It was a really 10-day round trip, in fact, to fetch the salt from Ibri. And next, and here is the end of the walk of 6 or 7 days back to Ibri, which the camels loaded with salt. The middle pictures arriving in the Wadi Ibri, just beside the Balad, and the bottom picture is Mukhasham, is the greeting of nose rubbing, which is taking place there. That's the standard way of, and then once again is pictures of the salt slabs which have been brought from Garat al-Mele. Right, there was a huge salt flat called the Samim. Samim, I think, means poisons, doesn't it, Julian?
Yeah.
Arabists?
Yes.
Tia. And, God, must remember to say something. Anyway, you can see on the bottom left, you can see the liquid salt seeping up in the roadway as a liquid and drying out as soon as it reaches the surface. If you leave it for a long time, it forms these enormous plaques, which was absolutely impossible to walk over because it's very, very, very hard and crusty. The company, BDO, drilled a well in the Samim, which was a dry hole also, and but there's the graded road leading up to the drill camp, right? The BDO had an operations centre which was located at a place called Afar, which was just beyond Adam, and it was not in Duru territory. It was an indeterminate tribal group, as far as I was concerned. I used to have to go there from time to time, but it was not my base. It was outside my Duru area. But a wedding was taking place, and I have lots of pictures in the book of this wedding. Here they are jumping and leaping about to the drumming. Right, PDO operations. How are we doing for time, okay?
You've got about 5 minutes in?
No, we'll have to cut out the end. PDO operations. When we decided to drill our first well using the rig that the earlier PDO had brought in, it's still in operation today, rig number 1, and it was spud in at Yibal in March 1962, and we invited the Wali of Ibri to fly down, and there is Ali bin Hilal, and that is the spudding in ceremony taking place. And as Ali put his hand out to pull the lever to start the operation, the whole thing burst into life before he touched the lever. There were two separate machines. Anyway, next. Nati was then spudded later in 1962, and Sheikh Hamid bin Hilal was delegated to come down for the spud-in of Nati. Next. It was the first oil discovery in Oman, and what they did was they did a drill stem test. Down the drill stem, you put a charge at the bottom, and then you drop a spanner down there, and it explodes the charge at the bottom, and that lets in by natural pressure anything that's down there. And if it's oil, the gas pressure will push the oil up. What to do with the oil when it's gushing out the top? Well, you have to burn it off because you didn't want a great lake of oil. Anyway, there it is, the first oil in discovery in Oman, and it's burning it off. I've got a few pictures of this Salif Wadi Thank was a lovely wadi and full of water. Thank, which was a town in the Jebel north of Ibri, there are the guards, and on the right you can see displayed the stocks which Tayoun has got his foot on. People would be put in the stocks if they'd misbehaved for a day or so, and there are legans too hanging from the tree. So that's just an indication of none of that was in use when I was there, but they'd hang them up for display. We had lunch. I want to, here's a typical lunch, ghada, of goat on rice. No vegetables in this place. And on the left is Malcolm Dennison, whom many of you will have known very well. Hands up. Malcolm Dennison? Yes, others. And he was the head of security and information. What's the word I want? Intelligence, that's right, for the Sultan of Oman's forces. And he was the head of it all. And he was a marvellous man. He had a huge influence. He had enormous understanding of everything to do with the tribes and the people. Because I have to mention that all the time I was there was, it's the aftermath of the Jebel War, but there were still rebels loyal to the usurping Ghalib and Talib and Suleiman bin Himyar, etc., the three of them, and the rebels were equipped with mines which they brought in and laid on the roads. And looking through my diaries, I find that there were quite frequent mine explosions because of army trucks who went over them. And my own Land Rover had a great steel plate under the ground, and we didn't have the lid on the Land Rover in case we went over a small mine. A big mine would have just eliminated us. But, so there was the danger of mines in the roads in the Jebel, not in the desert areas. This is the Sumail Gap, the Sumail Wadi, and two things of interest. On the left shows the sophisticated siphon system. If you have a fallage that's flowing across the country and it has to cross a wadi, what you do is to build a siphon, and the water comes to the hole. It goes underground through an enclosed pipe to the other side of the wadi and then up again, and it, as you know from siphons, the water continues to flow and is not disrupted. And here is a little girl out with her mother to do the washing. She's been parked, as you can see. Nizwa, which was the capital town of the interior, because my region was called the Dhahirah, the back of Oman, and the interior, the Dhahirah, the principal town was Nizwa. That's the gate to the souk, as it was then, and there, of course, is the Portuguese tower. And finally, we're down at Muscat, waterfront, and the little mosque beneath Al-Maradi fort, and on, next, this was the entrance, the way into Muscat. There was no coast road at all, and just stay with that a bit. And you can see there Maradi fort on the right-hand picture in the distance, and Muscat as it was then. And the company's headquarters was in the Beit Franza, and the premises just opposite. On the Minister of the Interior, Sayyid Ahmed bin Ibrahim, had his being and his office in that building on the left, and at dawn on the Eid, he would have a parade of the soldiery. On the right is the electric generator of Muscat, and that's what provided the electricity such as it was. A fisherman in Matra Bay with his little daughter, and finally, Tayoun and Mukhasham doing the nose greeting with a camel. The pictures up there, two things to say, are representative of the pictures in the book, of which there are many, many more. And the other thing I had not yet said was to say thank you to Tia, to Rosa and Asya. Where's Asya? Over there. And the team here have been marvellous in helping me put together this PowerPoint presentation. The books are available from the family bookshop in Muscat, and I haven't a clue how they're going to get here. But there are details. The family bookshop, it's got a website, so and I have found them very unresponsive. But did I tell you before that her maid, who had taken in charge the entire production and publication of this book, has sold 270 copies in Oman?
Thank you so much.